Welcome back, America. If you're still Christmas shopping, I have in my hand Only the Strong, Reversing the Left's Plot to Sabotage American Power. It's the brand new book by Senator Tom Cotton, who joins me now. Good morning, Senator Cotton.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. And last-minute Christmas plug for Only the Strong. You might be able to get it delivered. If not, you can probably pick it up at bookstores near you. I can promise you, and I think you'll agree, that it may be a weighty topic, but it's not a weighty read. So it might be a good book to pick up while you're sitting in an airport with your flights delayed or lounging around the house next weekend.
It's a brisk read, and I keep it here because on occasions like this, the day after the Omnibus is revealed, I go to page 219 and I read, the defense budget needs to grow to at least 4% of the economy and probably more than that. And on page 223, historian and Korean War veteran T.R. Fehrenbach cautioned that every society ultimately gets the military it wants and deserves. Based on your own metrics, what is the military America wants and deserves after the Omnibus unveiled its spending levels last night, Senator?
So Hugh, it's moving in the right directions. The Democrats agreed, somewhat surprisingly, to spend the money that they just voted to authorize last week. Now, we haven't achieved yet what I wrote about in Only the Strong, which is 3 to 5 year 35% real annual growth, in part because of high rates of inflation. But it's certainly better than a full year continuing resolution, which would freeze spending at last year's level. And again, it's moving in the right direction, I suspect, and hope that it will continue to do so when we have a new Republican House come January.
Now, Senator, I've explained to people this morning what Leader McCarthy said to Maria Bartiromo. The Senate can't take the risk of the House not being organized and not being able to pass a CR, especially the Pentagon. So I think you've got to pass this, even though if McCarthy had the gavel, things would be different in January. Is that part of the reasoning that you've heard in the caucus why you have to go for the omnibus now rather than wait for the House to get its act together, which could take weeks, months, who knows?
Well, no question, Hugh. There are many Senate Republicans who worry that the new House Republican majority will not be able to pass spending bills with 218 Republican votes come January or February. And the way that dynamic would play out would be that then Speaker McCarthy would have to go to the Democrats and ask for their votes to pass a bill. And if that were to happen, then the Democrats would obviously demand a ransom in the form of tens of billions of dollars of new spending that they didn't get in this bill. So there's no question that many Senate Republicans think that right now the best deal possible, not just in December, but also in the new year, will be a bill that holds the Democrats to the defense budget they just voted for last week, while also preventing the domestic spending budget from going up beyond what Joe Biden requested. I mean, after all, the Democrats have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on their own domestic priorities over the last 2 years in the course of a couple budget bills and an infrastructure bill and a science and technology bill. So there's no reason for them to demand more, and we were able to hold the line on that. Again, this is a big bill that just got released. There's obviously some good things in there. There's always going to be some bad things in there. I think senators and congressmen are going to spend the next few days poring over it. But there's the dynamic you cite certainly is on the mind of some Republican senators.
Let me focus in on one of the things I hope is in there. Mycroft Hewitt, my older brother, who I call Mycroft, is the PhD toxicologist. And I spent an hour with him talking about vaccines on Sunday. He said the one demographic, the one gender that has to worry and maybe step back from this vaccine are men 17 to 30, because while they might get myocarditis from the virus, they may also get it from the vaccine. So the vaccine mandate does not make any sense for young men joining the military. They have to make their own choice. Did you get rid of it in the omnibus?
The vaccine mandate for the military?
Yes.
No, actually, we got rid of that last week in the NDAA.
Oh, very good. Oh, very good.
So there have been no further requirements of coronavirus vaccines for our military. I know that the military leadership didn't like it. In my opinion, they were too stubborn and dug in on that. In part, they want to maintain the traditional principle that the military can require vaccinations or other medical treatments for its troops. And in general, I agree with that principle. You know, I had to take several vaccines when I was in the military, including painful and inconvenient ones like the smallpox vaccines. But there's a few differences here. One is that this vaccine is still under an emergency use authorizations. All those other vaccines have been around for decades, and smallpox for centuries and proven effective. Two, It had proven largely ineffective. I mean, it didn't really stop the transmission of the virus. It does appear to still help people who are elderly or medically frail, but that's the opposite of the military population. It's what you said, mostly 17 to 30-year-old men and some women as well, and there's almost no evidence that it's beneficial for them. And then third, we're in the middle of a recruiting and retention crisis. So I wish the Department of Defense had relented on this and accepted common sense months ago, but since they didn't, we acted in the defense bill last week.
Dr. Mycroft told me exactly that, and it's the science. I'm not preaching ideology here. I'm just telling you the science. It just is a toss-up, a jump ball for 17 to 30-year-olds, and probably not a good jump ball to take. Josh Hawley, your colleague, tweeted out early this morning that TikTok will be banned under the Omnibus from all government devices. Please tell me he's right.
Yeah, I believe that did make it into the final bill, and if so, it's a welcome development. I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation, and banning TikTok from all government devices is a good first step towards banning it entirely in our country.
Now, Senator, this is a mix of the NDAA and the Omnibus. Some people have argued we have to abandon the demand on the Pentagon to give us ship count goals because we never make them, and that it's a useless exercise. What do you think about that? That's not actually covered in Only the Strong. I went and looked for that, and strategic plans are great, but not if you don't live up to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, that which gets measured gets improved. So I think it's always worthwhile to know what your combat power is, where you're talking about the number of ships, number of aircraft, number of tracked vehicles, number of troops, and whether or not those are combat ready. You know, for many years in the Obama era, we had a number of aircraft that simply weren't able to fly because they were being taxed to the maximum, and there wasn't enough money in the operations and maintenance budget. So I don't think there's any question that we need an understanding of the platforms that we have available. Now, you can always debate about what the mix of those should be, and also whether they should be manned or unmanned going forward. But Congress and our senior military leaders need that information readily available to try to evaluate our ability to meet the threats of the world.
All right, now, Senator, in terms of what you actually agreed to spend last night, the $1.7 trillion, hadn't passed the Senate yet, but I'm assuming you're a yes vote on that. Does that have in there a pay raise for the military? And if so, do you know how much it is?
Yeah, it does, Hugh. And I think the number that we agreed to last week in the NDA was around 4%. I will say, shouldn't assume just yet that I'm going to be a vote for that. Obviously, I support the defense spending that meets the defense authorization bill last week. But it's a long bill. We got a couple days to review it. A lot of the legislation is stuff that already had passed the Senate or passed the House, so it's not new material. It's not complicated to review. It's always the step I want to take is to carefully review any bill before casting a vote for it, especially one of these big year-end bills. So tell your listeners, one thing I always said in the Senate is that they don't hide the good stuff in 4,000 pages. The good stuff is going to be in the press release that you read this morning. The bad stuff is going to be what you have to read through carefully and maybe do a few Control-F functions on the PDF to discover. But I'll review it carefully, and I'll make the vote based on what I think is best for Arkansas and best for our country.
Now, Senator, I want to drill down to something you may not know anything about. Senator Lee gave a speech about Lieutenant Alconis, a Navy lieutenant who's in prison in Japan on vehicular manslaughter. And it's a questionable case from what I can see. Senator Lee makes an argument that it's really a real questionable case. In either event, they are taking away his benefits at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of Defense has said, yeah, he's losing his benefits, his pay, his medical, his family's left out to dry. What do you make of that case and of the Pentagon's responsiveness to Senator Lee?
No, I know the case very well, Hugh. Lieutenant Alconis's roommate is an Arkansan, so I've been apprised of it, following the case, and been involved personally, as has Mike Lee, from the very beginning. You know, I wish that the Department of Defense would have made this exception to policy. In general, you take away pay and benefits from a soldier who's been lawfully convicted and detained in another country of a crime under the laws of those country and in accordance with our status of forces agreements. I think there's enough doubt about this case that is a prudent one-time decision by Secretary Austin to allow pay and benefits to continue for Lieutenant Alconis's wife and children. I wish he had made that decision last week. I've been working with Senator Lee first on an effort to perhaps put that provision in the spending bill. I don't think that happened, or perhaps to provide what's known as a private bill that would benefit the Alconis family in particular, to see if we can do that by the end of the year, if not early next year. Again, I think that there's enough questions, enough doubts about what happened to Lieutenant Alconis in Japan that we should err on the side of caring for his family as we continue to work with our friends in the Japanese government to try to bring him home.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, especially given the small amount of money going out and our recruitment crisis. You got to have people's backs in tenuous situations. I am curious, though, about the dynamic in the Pentagon. Admiral Stavridis, who was on yesterday, agrees with you and Senator Lee that this is a case that should be reviewed. He suggested, however, the SecDef is unwilling to reach into the Navy and into Secretary Del Toro's writ, who is in turn reluctant to reach into the Navy bureaucracy writ. I mean, if you're going to be SecDef, why not be SecDef for the big things as well as the little things, this being a small case but with a lot of attention?
Yeah, Hugh, I'm not really sure. I'm not privy to what Secretary Austin and Secretary Del Toro are thinking here. I think there's some element of the State Department as well. The idea that taking such an action might cast aspersions on the government of Japan or their justice system. Obviously, I would not do so. Japan is one of our closest treaty allies and a linchpin of our alliance and security system in the Western Pacific. I simply think that there's enough questions and concerns about this case that as we continue to work with the government of Japan over Lieutenant Alconis's status, we should not cut off the pay and benefits that's supporting his wife and his children here in America.
All right, last question, Senator. Did the money for Ukraine get in at the level that you think appropriate?
My understanding is that did happen, Hugh. We're going to review the line items there. I've long said that I think we should back Ukraine to the hilt with military aid. They've had great successes on the battlefield this year, especially over the last 3 months. Now is not the time to start drawing down that military aid. However, we need Europe to provide more financial, economic, and humanitarian aid. In some cases, the United States is the only country that can provide this military aid because of our strong, robust defense industry. But one thing that European nations, especially France and Germany, can provide is financial assistance. And they need to step forward. They're not carrying their own share of the load. They're not even doing what countries like Poland and other Eastern and Southern or Central European countries are doing. So, yes, we need to back Ukraine to the hilt with military aid. We need Europe, especially Germany and France, to step forward with more financial and economic aid.
Yeah, we also need the German tanks to work, which they're not. Senator Cotton, Merry Christmas to you and the entire Cotton clan. Thank you, and I'll talk to you in the new year, if not next week. Thank you for joining me regularly. I much appreciate it.
Thank you, Hugh. Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners.
Merry Christmas to all of you, and remember,